It was late in the evening when the sky began to change. The air felt heavy, and the wind carried a strange sound that made people rush to close their windows. In a small coastal town, a family of 4 sat inside their little wooden house. The father listened to the radio, which warned that a strong storm was moving toward the shore. The mother held her 2 children close, trying to calm them as thunder echoed outside. At first, they thought it would pass quickly. Storms were not new to them, and usually the rain would come and go. But that night felt different. The wind grew louder, slamming doors and shaking the roof. The power went out suddenly, and the house fell into darkness. The youngest child began to cry, holding onto the mother's arm tightly. The father found a flashlight and pointed it toward the window. Trees were bending in the wind, and rain hit the glass so hard it sounded like stones. They could hear people shouting outside, trying to move to higher ground. The mother packed a small bag with a few clothes, a blanket, and a little seashell necklace that the youngest child always wore. She put it around the child's neck and kissed their forehead. "We'll be fine," she said softly, though her voice shook. A loud bang came from the back of the house. The father opened the door and saw that part of the roof had broken off. Water was rushing in from the back, and they had to move quickly. "We need to leave now," he said, his voice firm but scared. He lifted one child into his arms while the mother held the other. The rain hit their faces as soon as they stepped outside. The streets were already flooded. Cars were stuck in the water, and pieces of broken wood floated around. People were shouting, helping each other climb into rescue boats. The sound of sirens mixed with the roar of the storm. The family tried to move toward the rescue team waiting near the main road. But with every step, the water grew deeper, rising above their knees. The father yelled something to the rescuers, trying to get their attention. Just then, a wave of muddy water pushed through the street, knocking everyone off balance. The mother fell, still holding the child. The flashlight dropped into the water and disappeared. She tried to grab the child tighter, but in the confusion, a strong current pulled them apart. For a few seconds, everything blurred. The screams, the rain, the cold. The mother called out the child's name again and again, her voice lost in the storm. The father ran toward her, pulling her up from the water, but the child was gone. The rescuers rushed toward them, shouting for everyone to get on the boats. The mother kept looking around, her eyes wild with fear, but there was no sign of the small figure she had just been holding. They were forced onto a rescue boat as the water rose higher. The mother clung to the edge, shouting, begging them to wait, but the rescuers told her it was too dangerous. The boat moved away, leaving behind the flooded streets that used to be their neighborhood. When morning came, the storm was finally gone, but the damage was beyond words. The town looked nothing like before. Houses were broken, trees torn out from the ground, cars flipped over. Rescue workers searched through debris and flooded roads, calling out for missing people. The mother walked through the mud barefoot, calling her child's name again and again. Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. The father tried to comfort her, but his own eyes were filled with silent tears. Days passed, then weeks. The police joined the search. They put up posters with the child's picture, visited shelters, and asked everyone they could find. Many people had been rescued, but some were still missing. The mother refused to believe her child was gone. She told everyone, someone must have found them. Maybe they're in another town. She carried the hope like it was the only thing keeping her alive. Every night, she sat on the porch of what was left of their house, holding the small blanket her child used to sleep with. She would whisper little stories into the wind, the same ones she used to tell before bedtime. Sometimes she would wake up in the middle of the night, thinking she heard a small voice calling from outside. The father rebuilt part of the house, trying to make it livable again. He worked in silence, his hands always shaking when he found something that reminded him of the past. A toy car, a shoe, a small drawing. The older child had grown quieter since the storm, often sitting alone near the sea, staring at the waves that had taken away their sibling. Months turned into years, but the mother never stopped searching. She wrote letters to organizations, traveled to nearby towns, and spoke to anyone who might have seen a lost child during the storm. Sometimes people would tell her stories. A child found in another city, a boy or girl living in an orphanage, and each time she would go there, full of hope. But every time it wasn't her child. One afternoon she visited a rescue camp far from their town. A volunteer told her that during the storm, a few children had been taken inland when roads were blocked. Records were lost and names were mixed up. The volunteer promised to check again, But even after searching, nothing led back to her missing child. The mother thanked them and walked away quietly, the seashell necklace still clutched in her hand. Back at home, she hung the necklace by the window, where the sunlight could touch it every morning. It became her symbol of hope. She told herself that as long as that shell was still shining, her child was still out there somewhere, safe and waiting to be found. The family tried to move on, but there was always an empty chair at the table, a small silence in every laughter. They never moved away from the town. The sea was painful to look at, but they couldn't leave the place where their child had disappeared. On every anniversary of the storm, the mother would walk to the shore with flowers. She would stand there for hours watching the waves roll in and out, whispering softly as if speaking to someone who could hear her. The father always stood a few steps behind, his hands in his pockets, eyes wet but quiet. 11 years would pass before fate decided to write the next part of their story. But on that first night, when the winds screamed and the world seemed to fall apart, none of them could imagine that one day, the same storm that took their child would also lead them back together again. For now, all they had was the sound of the sea, the whisper of the wind, and a promise that refused to die. When the storm ended that night, rescue workers searched through piles of broken wood and flooded streets. In a nearby town, far from where the waves had hit hardest, one of them found a small child sitting quietly under a fallen signboard. The child was shivering, covered in mud, eyes wide and blank, holding a piece of torn fabric that looked like part of a blanket. No one around knew where the child had come from. People were everywhere, crying, searching, calling out names. The rescuer picked the child up gently and carried them to a temporary shelter. There were many lost children there, some too young to speak, others too scared to remember their own names. The chaos made it almost impossible to keep track of who belonged where. Communication lines were broken, roads were blocked, and people were being moved from one place to another. For days, the child remained silent. The workers tried to ask questions, but all the child could say was that there had been water everywhere and a light that disappeared. A small seashell necklace hung around their neck, but no one knew its meaning. It was all they had. The child was later moved inland with other survivors to a larger city, where a foster center had been set up. Their volunteers and nurses cared for them. They were given a bed, food, and new clothes. The child rarely smiled, often waking up at night from nightmares, dreams of thunder, rushing water, and a voice calling their name through the dark. Over time, the child began to speak more, though they remembered little of what had happened before the storm. The only clear image that stayed in their mind was of standing near the sea and hearing laughter that felt warm and safe. But that memory grew fainter each year, like an old photograph slowly fading. The foster family that took the child in was kind. They didn't have much, but they gave love. The woman who became the foster mother treated the child as her own, making sure they went to school and celebrated birthdays. The man worked long hours but always brought small gifts, a pencil, a storybook, sometimes a sweet. They didn't replace the real parents, but they gave something the child had lost, a home. Years passed. The child grew into a quiet teenager who liked spending time near rivers and lakes. There was something comforting about the sound of water, even though it also brought an unexplainable sadness. Whenever it rained, they would sit by the window, tracing raindrops with their fingers and wondering why storms made their chests tighten. At school, they were often described as thoughtful, someone who listened more than they spoke. They had a small group of friends, but few knew about their past. The foster parents never hid the truth. They told them early on that they had been found during a terrible storm years ago, and that their real family had never been located. The child nodded and accepted it quietly, but deep inside there was always a question that wouldn't go away. Who am I really? Sometimes they would take out the seashell necklace that had stayed with them since childhood. It had small cracks now, but it still shimmered faintly under the light. They didn't know why it mattered so much, only that it gave a strange sense of comfort, like holding a piece of something familiar. On some nights they would dream of a woman's voice whispering softly, though they could never remember the words when they woke up. The dreams felt real, and each time they left a feeling of warmth mixed with sadness. Meanwhile, far away in the small coastal town, the mother of that lost child still kept the same hope burning. 11 years had passed since that night, but she never stopped believing. Every year, on the anniversary of the storm, She would visit the same place by the sea, placing flowers on the sand and whispering prayers. Her husband and older child had learned to live with the emptiness, though it never fully left them. The older sibling had grown into an adult now, working and helping to take care of the family. But every time it rained heavily, the silence in the house grew heavy again. The mother still kept the little clothes folded in a drawer untouched, as if waiting for the day her child would come back. She had joined community groups, helping families who had lost their children in disasters. Through this, she met many people, some who had found their loved ones years later, others who were still searching. Listening to their stories gave her both hope and pain. She would tell them, never stop looking. Sometimes miracles come when you least expect them. On quiet nights, she would look through old photographs, birthdays, seaside picnics, laughter before the storm, and hold the seashell necklace that had been left behind. She believed that somewhere, her child still had its twin piece. The two halves of that memory connected them, even if distance and time had torn everything else apart. Back in the city, the grown child often walked past a local market after school. One day, while passing a small stall that sold handmade jewelry, their eyes fell on something that made them freeze. Hanging from a wooden stand was a necklace, a shell almost identical to the one they wore. For a moment, their hearts skipped. The seller smiled and said it was common near the coastal regions, especially from one town that had been hit badly years ago. The child didn't say anything, but that night they couldn't stop thinking about it. The name of the town sounded strangely familiar, though they didn't know why. They looked it up on the internet and saw pictures of the storm from years ago. Broken houses, flooded streets, people holding signs of missing relatives. Something stirred deep inside them, a strange ache that felt both painful and familiar. They scrolled through the images, not knowing what they were looking for, until they saw one picture of a woman holding a small toy and a missing person poster. The photo was old and blurry, but something about the woman's face made their eyes fill with tears. It was as if their heart recognized her before their mind could. They tried to brush off the feeling, telling themselves it was just imagination, but the next few days were restless. They found themselves staring at the necklace, wondering if it had always been just an ornament, or if it was something more. At the same time, the mother in the coastal town had started using social media to reach out to lost families. Her friend helped her create a small online page where she shared stories of missing people and old photos. Among them was one post that had her child's picture, and a photo of the seashell necklace she still kept. The caption said simply, "Still waiting, still believing." For days the post didn't get much attention. But fate works quietly. One evening, as the now-grown child scrolled online before bed, the same post appeared on their screen. It was shared by someone from the group that posted about the coastal storm anniversary. They stopped scrolling. The image of the necklace caught their attention first. Then their eyes moved to the old photo of the child wearing it. The same round face, the same necklace, the same small smile. Their heart began to pound. They leaned closer to the screen, reading the caption again. Still waiting, still believing. It felt like time had frozen. The words didn't make sense at first, yet something inside them knew this wasn't just coincidence. Their hands shook as they touched the necklace around their own neck. It looked exactly the same. Same shape, same faded line near the edge. They sat there in silence for a long time, the room quiet except for the sound of rain tapping against the window. The rain always brought back memories, but this time it felt different. Finally, they opened the message box on the page. Their heart beat fast, unsure what to say. After typing and erasing several times, they finally sent a short message, just one sentence that would change everything that came next. "I think I have this same necklace. I've had it since I was little." Then they sat there staring at the screen, unsure of what would happen next, but deep down, feeling something they hadn't felt in years, and the faint, fragile pull of home. The mother was sitting by the window when her phone buzzed. She was used to messages from people asking about her missing child posts, most of them kind strangers offering prayers or sharing her story. But that night when she opened the message, her hands froze. "I think I have this same necklace. I've had it since I was little." She read it again, heart pounding. For a moment she couldn't breathe. Her eyes went to the old necklace hanging near the window, the one she had kept all these years. The photo on her post showed it clearly, and now someone far away was saying they had the same one. Her fingers shook as she typed a reply. "Hello, can you please tell me more about the necklace? Where did you get it? She hit send, her heart racing with both hope and fear. Minutes passed like hours before a response came. I don't know where it came from. I was found during a storm years ago. I've had it since then. The mother dropped her phone on her lap and pressed her hands to her face. It couldn't be, she thought. After 11 long years, could this really be her child? She didn't want to get her hopes up. She had been disappointed so many times before. But something about the words felt different this time. Something deep inside her said this was real. She typed again, asking gentle questions. What city they lived in, who found them, how old they were now. The replies came slowly, but each answer seemed to fit like pieces of a puzzle she'd been holding on to for years. The person on the other end said they had been found after a big storm, taken in by rescuers and later placed with a foster family. They remembered nothing about their life before that night. Only flashes of rain and a woman's voice calling out in the dark. The mother's eyes filled with tears. She wanted to scream, to laugh, to cry all at once. Her husband came into the room, worried by her trembling hands. She showed him the phone. He stared at the screen quietly, reading the messages again and again. His face went pale. We have to be careful, he said softly. We can't get our hopes too high until we're sure. But even as he said the words, his own voice was unsteady. He sat beside her, holding her hand tightly. For the first time in years, they could see a small light. Faint, fragile, but real. Over the next few days, they exchanged more messages. The mother shared an old photo, the last one taken before the storm, showing her child wearing the seashell necklace. When the person saw it, they replied within minutes. I think that's me, they wrote. It looks just like me when I was small. The mother cried until her eyes were swollen. She wanted to go to them right away. But they lived far away and everything had to be done carefully. Both sides agreed to arrange a DNA test through the authorities to be sure. The waiting was unbearable. The mother checked her phone every few minutes, unable to focus on anything else. She barely slept, spending her nights sitting by the window watching the sea. It was the same place where she had last seen her child, and now it felt as if the sea was finally bringing them back. Meanwhile, the grown child who had sent the message felt just as restless. Their foster parents were kind and supportive, though confused by what was happening. They had known the child's story since the beginning, and had always wondered about their real family. When the DNA test was arranged, the foster mother accompanied them. She held their hand, telling them softly, no matter what the result says, you'll always have a family here too. The child nodded, eyes full of emotion. Days later, the results were sent out. The child couldn't bring themselves to open the message right away. They sat in silence, holding the seashell necklace tightly, as if it would somehow prepare them for whatever came next. Back in the coastal town, the mother and father sat together, waiting for the call. The older sibling was there too, pacing across the room. The air felt thick with tension. The sound of the waves outside was the only thing breaking the silence. Then the phone rang. The mother answered, her voice trembling. She listened quietly, gripping the phone tightly. Her husband watched her face change. First confusion, then shock, then a flood of tears. She couldn't speak. When she finally looked up, her lips trembled as she whispered, "It's them. It's our child." No one spoke for several seconds. The father covered his face with his hands and let out a deep, shaky breath. The older sibling hugged their mother, crying openly for the first time in years. The child they had lost in the storm was alive. It took time to arrange the reunion. Both families, the biological and the foster, wanted to handle it carefully. The foster parents were emotional too. They had raised the child for more than a decade. They were sad to let go, but they also felt deep happiness that the child's real family had been found. When the day finally came, the mother woke early. She stood in front of the mirror, fixing her hair like she used to before taking her children to school. Her hands shook slightly as she picked up the seashell necklace and put it around her neck. The twin of the one her child had never taken off. The meeting place was a quiet park in the city, simple, private, away from cameras or reporters. The mother sat on a bench, her husband beside her, her heart beating so fast she could barely breathe. Then from a distance, she saw them walking toward her. The world seemed to stop. The child she had imagined for 11 years, now grown, taller, older, was right there. The same eyes, the same gentle face she had kissed 1,000 times in her dreams. She stood up slowly, afraid that if she moved too fast, the moment would vanish. Tears filled her eyes as the child came closer. Neither of them said a word. Then suddenly the mother took a small step forward and the child did the same. When they finally reached each other, they just stood there staring, trying to believe it was real. The mother reached out and gently touched their face, her fingers trembling. The child's eyes filled with tears, and then they both broke down, the mother pulling them into her arms, crying softly, whispering, "You came back. You really came back." The father joined, wrapping his arms around them both. Even the foster parents who had come with the child stood quietly nearby, tears in their eyes. No one said much after that. Words weren't needed. The years of pain, loss, and waiting melted away in that one embrace. Later, they all sat together and talked about what had happened, about the storm, about the life the child had lived since then. The mother listened to every word like it was a treasure, smiling through her tears. The child spoke softly, sometimes stopping to wipe their eyes, sometimes just staring at her as if afraid she would disappear. That night, when everyone had gone home, the mother sat awake, holding her child's hand. The sound of gentle rain fell outside, but it no longer brought fear. It was just rain now, nothing more. She looked at the seashell necklaces lying side by side on the table, identical except for one small crack. After 11 years, the two halves of her heart had finally found their way back to each other. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled faintly, but it didn't scare her anymore. Instead, she smiled, because this time after the storm, something had finally been returned. The next few days after their reunion felt like a dream for everyone. The mother woke up each morning and needed a moment to remind herself that it wasn't a dream anymore. Her child was truly home. Every time she saw them sitting at the breakfast table, or heard their voice calling from another room, she felt like her heart was learning how to beat again. The child, too, was slowly adjusting. Everything felt both familiar and strange. The faces, the smells, the sound of the sea, they all carried echoes of something deeply buried in memory. Sometimes they would catch themselves staring at a photo on the wall, trying to remember if they had once been part of that moment. The mother didn't rush them. She understood that 11 years was a long time. You can't just step back into a life that once existed, especially when you grew up not knowing it was there, so she kept things gentle. She would tell small stories about their childhood, how they used to run barefoot near the shore, how they loved collecting shells, how they would hide behind her whenever thunder struck. At first, the child listened quietly, unsure how to respond. But one evening, while they were sitting together on the porch watching the sunset, the child whispered softly, "I remember the shells. I remember holding one to my ear." The mother's eyes filled with tears. She reached over and held their hand. "Yes," she said, smiling through the tears. "You always said you could hear the sea talking." From that night, more small memories began to surface. Not clear, not complete, but flashes. Laughter, waves, warm hands, a song being hummed softly before bedtime. Each one made the connection between them stronger. The father watched all of this with quiet joy. He wasn't a man of many words, but every time he looked at his child, his eyes softened. Sometimes he would join them outside, pretending to fix something just so he could stay near. The older sibling, who had grown up carrying the pain of that loss, finally smiled freely again. For years they had kept their emotions locked away, but now they often found themselves sitting beside their younger sibling, showing them old things, drawings, toys, small secrets from their childhood together. The house, which had once felt heavy with silence, was alive again. There was laughter, music, the smell of food cooking, and light spilling through open windows. Even the sea outside seemed calmer, almost kinder. Still, healing wasn't instant. There were nights when the child would wake up from nightmares, flashes of the storm, the feeling of being alone in the dark, the sound of water rushing. The mother would rush to their side, hold them close, and whisper softly, "You're home now. You're safe." Sometimes they both ended up crying, the mother for what had been lost, the child for what had been missing. But through those tears they found peace. The foster parents visited a few times. The meeting was emotional for everyone. They hugged the mother and father, and though there was sadness in their eyes, there was also warmth. "We're just happy they found you," the foster mother said, smiling through tears. They always wondered where they came from. The two families shared stories of birthdays, of growing up, of small things that made the child who they were. It was clear that love had never been missing from either side. One had given life, the other had given protection. Both had helped shape the person standing before them now. After the visit, the child sat quietly for a long time. When the mother asked what they were thinking, they said, "I have two families now." She smiled and said softly, "Love doesn't run out. There's enough for everyone." The days passed, and slowly the child began to find comfort in the routines of their new old home. They would help the mother water the plants, go with the father to the market, and sometimes walk alone by the sea. The waves that once frightened them now felt like old friends. One afternoon, while walking along the beach, they noticed something half buried in the sand, a small piece of driftwood shaped like a heart. They picked it up and turned it over in their hands. It was simple, but it felt meaningful. They carried it home and placed it beside the seashell necklaces that now rested together in a glass box. That night, the family sat together, talking about everything that had happened. The mother said softly, "It feels like the sea took you away but brought you back when it was time." The child smiled and nodded. "Maybe the sea was just keeping me safe until I could come home." There was a quiet peace in those words. Everyone felt it. The story of their reunion began to spread around the town. Neighbors who had once helped search during the storm came to visit. Many cried when they saw the child, remembering the posters that had hung on walls years ago. They said it felt like a miracle, proof that even after years of loss, hope could still bring light. The mother didn't like attention, but she agreed to share their story for one reason: to give strength to others who were still waiting for their loved ones. She told people, "Even if it takes years, never stop believing. Sometimes life hides answers until the right moment." In the evenings, she would still sit by the window where she had once waited every night. But now she didn't wait for the impossible. She watched the sea with gratitude. The waves no longer carried pain. They carried memories and peace. One night, it began to rain softly. The sound filled the house, gentle and calm. The mother looked at her child and asked if they were afraid of the rain. The child smiled and shook their head. "Not anymore," they said. "It sounds like home now." The mother reached out and brushed a drop of rain from their hair. "Then the storm is truly over," she whispered. They stayed like that for a long time, just listening to the rain. No fear, no loss, only warmth. Later, as the family prepared to sleep, the mother glanced at the seashell necklaces one more time. They lay side by side under the soft light. For years she had prayed to see that sight again. Now every time she looked at them, she was reminded of how love can survive anything. Even time, even distance, even the strongest storm. The child's life began to open like a new chapter. They started helping with community projects, joining their mother in volunteer work for missing children. Every time they met another parent still searching, they would say gently, "Don't give up. Miracles do happen. I'm one of them." And they meant it. Months later, the town held a small ceremony to remember the people who had lost their lives in the storm. The family attended together. When it was time to place flowers by the sea, the child walked forward, holding one flower in each hand, one for the night they were lost, and one for the day they were found. The mother watched quietly, tears in her eyes, proud and grateful. She knew there were still people missing in the world, still families waiting for miracles. But she also knew that hope was like the sea. Even when it disappears from sight, it's always there, waiting beneath the waves. That evening, as the sun went down and the sky turned golden, the child looked at their mother and said softly, "I think the sea knew I'd come back. It just took a while." The mother smiled, her eyes full of love. "Maybe the sea never really lost you," she replied. "Maybe it was just teaching us both how strong love can be." And for the first time in 11 years, the sound of the sea no longer brought pain. It brought peace, as if the storm had finally given back everything it had taken. Months turned into a year since the day they were reunited. Life slowly found its rhythm again. The child had started school in the nearby town, eager to learn and catch up on the years that had slipped away. Though they were older than most in their class, it didn't bother them. They had lived through something few people could ever understand. Every lesson, every new thing they learned felt like a second chance. a gift life had quietly saved for them. The mother walked them to school every morning. She never missed a day, even if it meant waking up early or walking through rain. Every step beside her child was precious. She remembered the nights she had prayed just to know if they were alive, and now she could hold their hand again. That simple act meant everything. Sometimes, while walking home, she would stop by the sea. The waves still carried a power she respected, but now she looked at them with calm eyes. The storm that had once taken everything from her had, in a strange way, given her back more than she ever expected. Not just her child, but hope, patience, and strength she didn't know she had. At home, the father often watched the two of them from the porch, smiling quietly. He had always been the one who kept his pain locked away, believing he needed to be strong for everyone else. But after their child's return, he began to talk more. Some evenings he would sit beside the child and tell stories from the old days, about how they used to chase crabs on the beach or try to fly kites against the wind. The child would laugh, trying to imagine themselves in those memories, and though some moments felt distant, the laughter made them feel real again. The older sibling had grown close too. They had spent years living in the shadow of loss, but now they found themselves protective, always checking in, always making sure their younger sibling felt safe. They would walk together to the market, share snacks, and sometimes stay up late talking about everything, about the years apart, about dreams for the future, and about the strange feeling of being part of two worlds at once. One night, as they sat on the roof under the stars, the younger one said softly, "It feels like I missed so much." The older sibling smiled gently. "You didn't miss it," they said. "It was just waiting for you." That moment stayed in their hearts, a quiet truth spoken under the open sky. The foster parents called often. They never tried to hold on too tightly, only checked in to make sure their once foster child was doing well. They had promised to visit again soon. The child would send them pictures of their school uniform, of the family together, of the sea at sunset. "I want them to see I'm happy," they told their mother once. The mother nodded with a smile, knowing love didn't end just because distance grew. Over time, the child started helping at a small community center nearby. They helped other children with reading and art. Sometimes, during group sessions, they would share their story in simple words. They didn't talk about pain too much. Instead, they spoke about hope, about how even when everything feels lost, something unexpected can still happen. The children listened with wide eyes, and the teachers often said that the way they spoke could make even the hardest hearts soften. The local paper wrote a story about their reunion, and people from nearby towns came to hear it. Some cried, others just smiled quietly, moved by the miracle, but the mother never saw it as something magical. She saw it as love doing what love always does, finding its way back, no matter how far it has to go. One evening, when the air was warm and the sky painted orange by the setting sun, the family decided to visit the small hill near the sea, where they had once taken family pictures years ago. It was overgrown with wildflowers now, but the view was still the same: endless water, gentle waves, and a horizon that seemed to touch the sky. They sat together in silence for a while, each lost in their thoughts. The child looked out at the sea and said, "It's strange. I used to be scared of storms, but now I think sometimes storms bring you where you need to be." The mother turned to look at them, her eyes soft. "Maybe that's true," she said. "Sometimes storms don't just destroy, they also show us what really matters." They stayed until the stars began to appear. The sound of the sea was calm, steady, almost like a heartbeat. In the months that followed, the child grew into a young adult. They worked hard, studied well, and carried themselves with quiet strength. Every now and then, someone would recognize them and ask, "Are you the one who was lost during the storm?" They would smile politely and say, "Yes, but I was also found." Those words held deep meaning, a reminder that being lost wasn't the end, and being found was not just about being seen, but about being loved, remembered, and welcomed home. On the 11th anniversary of the storm, the family held a small gathering by the sea. They invited the people who had searched back then, neighbors, rescuers, and friends who had never stopped hoping. There was food, laughter, and soft music. It wasn't a celebration of the storm, but of survival, love, and faith. When it was time to speak, the mother stood in front of everyone. Her voice trembled at first, but then grew steady. "For years, I thought that night had taken everything from me," she said. But now I see it gave me something too, a story that reminds us that even in darkness, love doesn't disappear. It waits, and one day it finds its way back. People wiped their eyes quietly. The father stood beside her, holding her hand. The child then stepped forward. They looked at the crowd, at the faces of people who had once searched in rain and wind for a child they barely knew, and said softly, "Thank you for never giving up. I don't remember that night, but I know I'm here because you didn't stop looking. Sometimes the smallest hope is enough to keep someone alive." The crowd clapped, not out of celebration, but out of respect. After the gathering, the family walked along the shore again. The child bent down and picked up a small shell, placing it in their pocket. The mother noticed and smiled. "Another memory for the box?" she asked. The child nodded. "Yes, this one feels different though. It's not from being lost, and it's from being found." As they walked home under the moonlight, everything felt complete. The house that had once held only silence now carried laughter and warmth. The walls, the pictures, the small glass box with the shells, everything told a story that would be remembered for generations. Late that night, the mother sat by the window once more, looking out at the sea. The moonlight shimmered on the waves. She thought of all the years she had spent wondering, hoping, and praying. Then she looked at the closed bedroom doors, at the peaceful sounds of her family sleeping, and whispered, "Thank you." For the first time in a long time, she didn't pray for anything. She simply felt gratitude, pure, quiet gratitude for the miracle of being given back what she thought was gone forever. The storm that had once taken her child had ended long ago, but its memory had led to something deeper. Proof that even when life seems cruel, it can still surprise you with kindness. And as the waves touched the shore that night, soft and endless, it felt as if the sea itself was whispering a promise that love, once found, would never be lost again.